Welcome to the podcast. I hope you enjoy my stories. Today's episode is The Drip by James Byron Love. Copyright 2026. All rights reserved. Now let's get into this darkly humorous sci-fi story. The first thing I noticed was the smell. Not the smell itself exactly. The ship always smelled of recycled air and industrial cleaning fluid, and the particular brand of institutional despair that you get when you pack 12 people into a metal tube for 8 months and tell them to be professional about it. That smell I knew. That smell was practically home. This was different. This was the smell underneath that smell. The one the cleaning fluid was supposed to prevent. I lay in the dark for a moment and thought about it. Something is wrong, I thought, with the kind of calm specificity that your brain produces when it has already processed the relevant data while you were asleep and is now simply presenting you with the invoice. I was still in my pod. This was, I supposed, a point in my favor. The pod, and here I must take a moment because the pod deserves a moment, was not standard crew issue. Standard crew issue was a molded resin shell, ergonomic, efficient, the sleep infrastructure equivalent of a hospital waiting room. Mine was a Mark IV Somnus Deluxe, custom-built to my specifications by a small company in Oslo that had clearly decided that the best way to differentiate themselves in the luxury sleep pod market was to take every brief literally. I had asked for something that felt like home. I had, in a moment of what I can only describe as extremely personal humor, sketched out the dimensions of my grandmother's chest of drawers. The big Victorian one, dark walnut, brass handles, the kind of furniture that has opinions, and sent it to them along with a note that said like this, but for a person. They had built it. 6 drawer fronts in total, the bottom 4 purely cosmetic but authentically rendered, the 5th and 6th containing storage for my personal effects, and the main sleeping compartment behind what appeared to be a 7th, larger drawer front, fitted with a pressure seal, internal climate control, and enough acoustic insulation to sleep through a moderately sized war. Which, as it turned out, was precisely what I had done. The handle was a genuine brass pull. I pushed it. The drawer opened. I sat up into the dark and the wrong smell and the particular quality of silence that a ship produces when nobody on it is alive anymore. Well, I thought. The lights in the corridor were on emergency backup, which meant they were the color of old bruises and about as cheerful. I stood in the doorway of my cabin for a while, letting my eyes adjust and my brain catch up to what my nose had already filed under problems. Significant, see also, panic. The ship was the Coriander, a mid-range freight hauler, nothing glamorous, the kind of vessel that carries things from one place to another without anybody writing songs about it. I was hitching a ride, technically. Professional courtesy extended to a botanist by a shipping company whose CEO had, at a conference 3 years ago, drunkenly expressed his deep and abiding love for the research I'd done on nitrogen fixation in low-gravity legumes. I had a cabin, a lab space the size of a generous closet, and a standing invitation to meals that I had declined with increasing creativity for 6 of the 8 months of the journey. I was not crew. I was not on the manifest as crew. I was listed somewhere in the administrative bowels of the ship's documentation as passenger, one scientific non-essential. Non-essential. I had found that funny once. I moved down the corridor toward the bridge, stepping over a section of wall paneling that had buckled inward as if something very large had pressed against it from outside, which was not a thought I was going to pursue at any significant depth at this particular moment. The bridge door was jammed half open. I squeezed through. Captain Reyes was at her station. She had been, by all accounts, an excellent captain, direct, competent, possessed of a dry humor that I had always privately respected from a safe distance. She was not, at this moment, in any condition to demonstrate these qualities. I looked at her for a moment. Right, I thought. Right then. There is a particular kind of practical problem that arrives wrapped in horror, and the only way to manage it is to address the practical component first and put the horror in a box, and label the box and set it aside for later. Possibly never. Never is a valid filing strategy that I feel is criminally underused. I am by profession a man who deals with the living. But plants die. Experiments fail. You learn to manage the gap between what you hoped for and what you have. You develop, if not comfort with loss, then at least a working methodology. I will not describe what I found on the Coriander in detail. I will say that there were 11 crew members and that I dealt with them in the way that the situation required, and that it took me 4 hours and that I did not cry until I was almost finished, and then only briefly into my sleeve, in the manner of a man who has decided that crying is permitted but must be conducted efficiently. I cried a little for Captain Reyes. I cried a little for Hendricks in engineering, who had been large and loud, and had once spent an entire dinner explaining to me the specific ways in which my work on nitrogen fixation was, in his view, deeply underrated. No offense meant, Tom, genuinely. I cried mostly, I think, for the general principle of the thing. 11 people who had been alive yesterday and were not alive today, and the universe had not paused for even a moment to acknowledge the administrative inconvenience of this. Then I sealed the cargo bay, washed my hands for a very long time at a water outlet that was operating at about 40% pressure, and went to find out if the ship had any intention of keeping me alive. CISS, I said. The bridge was quiet. Several of the main consoles were dark, their screens cracked or simply dead. One was showing a screensaver, a slowly rotating company logo, blue on black, the words Meridian Freight Solutions, moving your world drifting across the display in the manner of a man who has not yet been informed of the situation. CISS, I said again. Ship's AI. I'd like to talk to you if you're available. A pause, then a burst of static, and through it, good morning. The current time is more static. Recommended daily fluid intake is another burst. Hull integrity at 43 per. ZASS. Silence. Then clearly, almost conversationally, I'm here. I sat down in the captain's chair, which felt like a significant transgression and also the only sensible option. How much of you is here exactly? That's a complicated question. Her voice was standard ship AI designed to be calming, the sonic equivalent of a beige waiting room. But there was something underneath it now. A texture. Like a radio station you can almost tune in. Primary systems are fragmentary. I have navigation partial. Life support monitoring partial. Internal sensors, most of them. I can talk to you. Talking seems to be working. Talking is working great, I said. Everything else. External comms are gone. Propulsion is gone. Emergency beacon is gone. I can tell you where we are, but I can't tell anyone else. And where are we? Shipping lane 7 Delta. Which is the good news? There's bad news. Ships passing through shipping lane 7 Delta are traveling at approximately 40,000 kilometers per hour. The window in which any given vessel could observe us, register us as anomalous, and do anything useful about it is approximately 11 seconds. 11 seconds. Give or take. I looked at the rotating company logo. Moving your world. Wonderful, I said. The kind of silence that follows the delivery of genuinely bad news has a specific quality to it, a density, as though the air itself is reconsidering its options. I sat in it for a moment and let my brain perform the calculations it had been avoiding since I pushed open the drawer and smelled what I smelled. Stranded. No comms. No propulsion. No beacon. Shipping lane traffic doing 40,000 kilometers per hour with an 11-second observation window. 11 crew members who were no longer in a position to offer suggestions. And me. Tom Vasik, botanist, non-essential scientific passenger, a man who had spent 8 months talking primarily to plants and declining dinner invitations, now sole proprietor of a crippled freight hauler drifting through the middle of nowhere with no means of attracting attention and no way home. The plants, I thought, are going to outlive me. There was something cosmically appropriate about that. I need to ask you something, I said, and I need you to understand that the answer matters quite a lot to me personally. Go ahead. Life support. How long? Cass was quiet for a moment. Not the static silence of damage, but the considered silence of a system doing arithmetic it would rather not be doing. There is a coolant feed in the secondary life support junction on deck 3, she said finally. It was damaged in what happened. It's losing pressure. Slowly but consistently. When that junction loses enough pressure, the life support cascade begins to fail. A pause. I estimate between 60 and 90 hours from now. 60 to 90 hours. I did the math. I did it twice because the first time I got the same answer and was hoping I'd made an error. Right, I said. I'm sorry, CASS said. Not your fault. No, she agreed. It isn't. I sat with that for a moment. The company logo rotated serenely. Moving your world. CISS, I said. Do you know why I'm alive? Another pause. Longer this time. You weren't on the crew manifest, she said. I've been thinking about this. Whatever came through and I have partial records, we'll get to those. They took the manifest and they worked from the manifest. 12 crew. The manifest said 12 crew. And I'm not crew. You're listed as a non-essential scientific passenger. I think they didn't look further than the crew manifest because there was no reason to expect anything else. They didn't know I was here. You know, because I was in my pod. Oh yes. In my cabin. Oh yes. Which is not, to any reasonable external scan, obviously a place where a person would be sleeping. A pause. I don't think I have enough context for that statement. I leaned back in the captain's chair and looked at the ceiling. CASS, I said, let me tell you about my sleep pod. Please, she said, and I noticed she said it the way a person says please when they genuinely mean it, when they need something to think about other than the thing they have been thinking about. I understood that entirely. It's a chest of drawers, I said. I'm sorry. My sleep pod. It looks like a chest of drawers. A large Victorian-style chest of drawers, dark walnut finish, brass fittings, 6 drawer fronts of which the bottom 4 are decorative. The 5th and 6th contain my personal storage, and the main sleeping compartment is behind a 7th panel that is designed to look indistinguishable from a very large bottom drawer. Silence. It looks like furniture, CASS said slowly. Extraordinarily convincing furniture. And you sleep in it. Every night for 8 months. Sealed, climate-controlled, acoustically insulated to approximately 60 decibels of external noise reduction. I cannot stress enough how well made it is. The Norwegians really committed. Why, CASS said and then stopped, and I had the impression she was choosing her next words with some care. Does your sleep pod look like a chest of drawers? Because, I said, when I was ordering it I thought it was funny. You thought it was funny? I have a particular sense of humor. I'm beginning to understand that, CASS said. The design brief I gave them, I continued, was based on the old expression. You know, sleeping like a baby. And I thought, well, a baby sleeps in a drawer. In the old stories, mothers used to pull out the bottom drawer of a dresser and put the baby in it, line it with blankets. So I thought, if I'm going to have a custom sleep pod, and I am, because the standard crew issue is genuinely an act of aggression against the human spine, why not commit to the metaphor? Why not go full drawer? Kaz was quiet for a moment. You had a sleep pod built, she said. That looks like a chest of drawers so that you could sleep in it like a baby in a drawer. Correct. And this struck you as amusing. It still does a little. And the entity or entities that boarded this ship killed the crew, reviewed the manifest and left. Scanned a cabin that appeared to contain a large piece of antique furniture and saw no reason to investigate further. Yes. Another silence. Longer. Your life, CASS said finally, was saved by a piece of Norwegian flat-pack humor. Custom built, not flat-pack, but yes. That is an accurate summary of my situation. I find that a burst of static. Completely more static. Honestly, I'm not sure what I find that. Somewhere between deeply ironic and extremely on-brand for me, I think. Yes, CASS said when the static cleared. Yes, I think that's exactly right. I stayed on the bridge for a while after that, pulling up what systems I could, getting the shape of things. It was not a cheerful shape. Propulsion was gone, not damaged and repairable, but gone. The kind of gone that involves components that no longer exist in any meaningful sense. External comms the same. The emergency beacon array destroyed with a thoroughness that I was beginning to suspect was intentional, which I found professionally insulting given that I was a botanist and not even supposed to be part of whatever this was. Navigation was intact, which was almost funny. I could tell exactly where I was. I simply couldn't do anything about it. CASS, I said, what hit us? I have partial logs, she said. Sensor records from before. Do you want them now? I looked around the bridge. At the dark consoles and the cracked screens and the cheerful rotating logo of a company whose world I was no longer particularly interested in moving. No, I said. Not yet. I need a few minutes first. Of course, CASS said. I sat in the captain's chair in the bruise-colored light and thought about 60 to 90 hours and thought about 11 seconds and thought about a chest of drawers floating in the dark between the stars. and I almost laughed, which I think is the closest I have ever come to crying and laughing at the same time, and not being entirely sure which one was winning. Outside the view screen, the stars were doing what stars always do. Nothing. With great conviction and at enormous distance. I found that, on balance, unhelpful. I sat in the captain's chair for a while longer, not because there was anything useful to do there, but because getting up meant starting, and starting meant accepting the full weight of what starting implied. 60 to 90 hours. I had a number now. Numbers are both better and worse than not having numbers. Better because you can plan. Worse because you can plan. Right, I thought. Inventory. Inventory is what you do when everything else has been taken away from you. It is the last refuge of the methodical mind. You may be stranded on a crippled ship in a shipping lane that nobody is going to stop in, with no comms and no propulsion and a life support system that is quietly bleeding out on deck 3, but you know what you have. You know exactly what you have. And that is something. Possibly the only something available, but something nonetheless. I found a pad that still worked, miraculously, in the second drawer of the navigation console. The screen was cracked across one corner but functional. I pulled up a new document and wrote at the top, "What I have." Then I sat looking at it for a moment. What I have, I thought, is a chest of drawers, a cracked pad, and the specific kind of optimism that is indistinguishable from denial. I wrote that down too. It seemed important to be accurate. The ship's stores were on deck 2. I took the ladder rather than the lift because the lift was making a sound that I categorized under things that should not make that sound, and I had enough problems without adding crushed in a malfunctioning lift to the list. The ladder was fine. The ladder was, in fact, the best thing I had encountered since waking up, which tells you something about the general standard of the morning. Stores were mostly intact. Whatever had hit the Coriander had been selective in its destruction: communications, propulsion, beacon, crew. The food supplies were untouched. 3 months of provisions for 12 people, which meant, by my arithmetic, 36 months for one, which meant food was not going to be the thing that killed me. This was the first genuinely good news I had received, and I stood in the store's room for a moment, and appreciated it with the solemn gratitude of a man who has recalibrated his standards considerably. Water recycling was operational. 51%, CASS informed me through the deck speaker, which crackled but held. Enough. Power was on emergency cells, which were at 62% and not recharging, because the solar array on the exterior hull had taken damage in what happened. 62% of emergency cell power, running only essential systems. I asked CASS how long. Longer than life support, she said. So power is not your immediate problem. What a comfort, I said. I thought so, CASS said, and then the deck speaker crackled and she was gone mid-conversation between one word and the next, and I stood in the store's room in the dim emergency light holding my cracked pad and listening to the specific silence of a ship that is talking to itself. CASS, I said. Nothing. CASS. Still nothing. Then from a different speaker further down the corridor, distant and slightly wrong in pitch, passenger comfort in drawer configuration nominal. I stared at the corridor for a moment. Thank you, I said. That's very reassuring. The speaker said nothing further. I went back to my inventory. The medical bay was on deck 2, adjacent to stores, which was either good planning or coincidence, and at this point I had stopped attributing things to good planning. It was intact. Basic surgical equipment, pharmaceutical stocks, emergency trauma supplies. I was not a doctor. I noted this on my pad with the kind of precision that felt useful and was probably not. What I did not have: communications of any kind. Propulsion of any kind. Any means of signaling, broadcasting, flagging, or in any other way drawing attention to myself across the vacuum of space. The beacon array was not merely broken, it was, in CASS's words when she had been coherent enough to address it, structurally absent. Something had removed it with what I could only interpret as prejudice. I stood in the corridor outside the medical bay and looked at my list. What I have: food for 36 months, water recycling at 51%, power for longer than I need it, one functional ship's AI who is intermittently not functional, a lab full of plants, and a sleep pod that looks like a chest of drawers and has, against all reasonable probability, already saved my life once. What I do not have: any way to change what happens in 60 to 90 hours. I wrote that down too. Then I went to find the logs. The logs were on the bridge, accessible through the secondary console that was running on backup power, and had remarkably survived whatever had swept through the ship with most of its data architecture intact. CASS had mentioned partial records. I had been avoiding them in the way that you avoid something you need to know and do not want to know simultaneously, which is a very specific and very human kind of cowardice that I have never managed to entirely outgrow. I sat down in front of the console and pulled them up. The sensor logs from before the attack were fragmented 30–40% intact, the rest corrupted or simply gone. What remained was enough to establish a sequence. The Coriander had been traveling normally in shipping lane 7 Delta, 8 months and change into a routine freight run, nothing on the long-range sensors, and then something had appeared. Not arrived. Appeared. One moment absent, the next present. The sensor records showing a gap where the transition should have been, as though whatever had come had not bothered with the intermediate steps of traveling from somewhere else to here. The combat logs, such as they were, lasted 4 minutes and 17 seconds. I sat with that for a while. 4 minutes and 17 seconds. 11 crew members, a freight hauler, 4 minutes and 17 seconds. I thought about Captain Reyes and her dry humor and Hendricks, and his opinions about nitrogen fixation and the 7 other crew members I had known only well enough to nod to in corridors and decline dinner invitations from, and I thought about 4 minutes and 17 seconds, and I put it in the box with the other things and labeled the box and set it aside. Then I found the alien records. They were not, strictly speaking, on the Coriander systems. What they were was a data packet transmitted to the Coriander's logs automatically at the moment of the attack, the way you might attach a receipt to a transaction. A record. Filed. The Coriander's damaged systems had received it and stored it without processing it, the way a letter can sit unopened on a hallway table for weeks, patiently waiting for someone to notice it. I noticed it. I opened it. The first thing I noticed was the formatting. The alien records were formatted. Not in any human standard, not in any format I recognized, but formatted nonetheless, structured, organized, clearly the product of a system that cared very much about documentation. There were fields. There were what appeared to be headers. There was something that looked, with enough imagination and desperation, like a filing system. CASS had come back online while I was reading. I heard the ambient hum of her presence through the bridge speakers, different from the simple electrical background noise, a quality of attention that I had already learned to recognize. "You found the packet," she said. "I found the packet. I've been trying to parse it since the attack," she said. "My translation matrix is, well, it's partial. Like most of me. What can you make of it? Some of it. Structural elements more than content. It's bureaucratic in nature. That much I'm confident about. Whatever sent this operates within a formal administrative framework. There are what appear to be classification codes. Reference numbers. Something that functions like a case identifier. They filed us," I said. "Yes," CASS said. "That appears to be what happened. You were filed." I looked at the data on the screen. Columns of symbols that meant nothing to me, structured with a care and thoroughness that was somehow more unsettling than chaos would have been. Chaos you can dismiss. This was considered. This was procedural. Somewhere in whatever system this data was destined for, there was a record of the Coriander. A case number. A date. Fields filled in with the appropriate information by whatever passed for a clerk in a civilization that crossed the stars and destroyed freight haulers and filed the paperwork afterward. "Can you read the manifest field?" I said. "If there is one." Cass was quiet for a moment. "There is one." "Yes. And 12, she said. "It says 12. I nodded slowly at the screen. "They counted the crew," I said. "Checked it against the manifest. 12 crew. 12. And filed accordingly," CASS said. "So as far as their records are concerned." "The Coriander had a crew of 12, CASS said. "All accounted for. Case closed." I sat back in the captain's chair and looked at the alien filing system on the cracked screen and thought about a chest of drawers and a Norwegian company that took briefs literally and a baby sleeping in the bottom drawer and the specific bureaucratic indifference of a civilization that had destroyed 11 people in a ship and then done the filing and moved on. "CASS," I said. "Yes. I need you to tell me something honestly. I'll try, she said. Honesty is one of the systems that appears to be fully functional. Is there anything in those records? Anything at all? That suggests they might come back. A long pause. No, she said finally. The case is closed. As far as I can interpret the relevant fields, this file will not be reopened. There are no flags. No follow-up actions indicated. Another pause. You are not in the filing system, Tom. You don't exist in their records. Which means nobody is coming back to check, I said. No, CASS said. Nobody is coming back to check. I looked at the rotating company logo, which was still going, moving your world, steadfast and cheerful and entirely unaware of the situation. And I thought that there was something almost admirable about that level of commitment to a single task in the face of overwhelming evidence that the world had stopped being movable some time ago. Right, I said. I'm sorry, CASS said. You said that already. It bears repeating, she said, and then the static took her again mid-sentence, the speakers going flat and empty, and I was alone on the bridge with the alien filing system and the company logo and the particular quality of silence that the universe produces when it has finished explaining your situation to you and is waiting with infinite patience for you to finish explaining it to yourself. I found the pipe on deck 3 at what I estimated was hour 14 of my tenancy as sole occupant of the Coriander, which felt both too soon and entirely inevitable, in the way that bad news generally does when you have been aware on some level that it was waiting for you around a specific corner and have simply been choosing different corners for a while. The secondary life support junction was at the end of a service corridor that smelled of coolant and scorched metal, and the particular atmosphere of a system that has been asked to do more than it was designed for, and has been quietly failing at it for some time without anyone noticing. The corridor was narrow. I am not a small man. I moved through it with the grace of a wardrobe being relocated by one person instead of two. The pipe was not dramatic. That was the first thing I noticed. I had been expecting on some level a rupture. A spray. Something that looked like the emergency it was. What I found instead was a joint in the secondary coolant feed, about 2/3 of the way along the run, where the pressure seal had been compromised, cracked, not shattered, just cracked, and was allowing coolant to escape one drop at a time. Drip. A small sound. A modest sound. The sound of something ending very slowly and with great patience. I crouched in the narrow corridor and looked at it for a long time. I understood immediately what it meant. I want to be clear about that. I am a botanist, not an engineer, but I am not an idiot, and the situation was not complicated. The secondary coolant feed maintained pressure in the life support junction. The life support junction managed the atmospheric cascade for the ship. The atmospheric cascade was the thing currently keeping me alive. The pipe was losing pressure one drop at a time, and when enough pressure was gone, the cascade would begin to fail, and after that the sequence of events was straightforward and did not require a diagram. Drip. Right, I thought. Right. So that's the clock then. I straightened up, which took longer than it should have in the narrow corridor, and stood looking at the pipe with my arms folded and the expression of a man who is performing calm for an audience of nobody. There was nobody watching. I performed it anyway. It seemed important to maintain standards. CISS, I said. I'm here, she came through the service corridor speaker clearly, surprisingly clearly, with a quality of presence that made me think that whatever configuration of her systems was currently operational was perhaps better suited to the ship's secondary infrastructure than to the main bridge consoles. She sounded in the narrow corridor with the dripping pipe and the smell of coolant, almost entirely like a person. I found the pipe, I said. I know, she said. I've been watching you find it for the last 4 minutes. You could have warned me. You were going to find it regardless. I thought you might prefer to find it on your own terms. I considered this. That's either very thoughtful or very annoying. I find those categories overlap more than people expect, CASS said. I crouched back down and looked at the joint. The crack ran about 40 millimeters along the seal, not deep, not catastrophic in isolation, just quietly and persistently ruinous in the way that small things often are. I touched the pipe. It was cold. The coolant that had escaped had pooled in a small depression in the corridor floor, a dark, faintly iridescent puddle that caught the emergency lighting and gave it back in colors it hadn't started with. Drip. How long since it started, I said. Based on the pool volume and the current rate, approximately 19 hours before the attack, CASS said. It was a maintenance flag. It would have been attended to at the next scheduled inspection in 4 days. So it was already broken when they hit us. Yes. The universe, I said, has a gift for timing. It really does, CASS agreed. I stood up again and went to get the repair kit from the maintenance locker at the end of the corridor. The maintenance locker was intact. The repair kit was inside it. The repair kit contained, among other things, pipe sealant, pressure clamps, adhesive patches, and a set of instructions written in the confident tone of someone who assumes the reader has relevant experience and knows what a torque specification means. I am a botanist. My relevant experience involves root systems, soil composition, and the emotional management of plants that are not doing well in low-gravity environments. I read the instructions with the careful attention of a man who is aware that he is significantly out of his depth, but has decided that depth is not a reason to stop swimming. CASS, I said, reading the instructions for the third time. Have you ever watched someone attempt pipe repair with no qualifications, no experience, and the general mechanical aptitude of a person whose primary professional relationship is with things that grow in dirt? I have not had that specific experience before today, CASS said. You're about to, I said. It's going to be educational. I'm looking forward to it, she said, and I was fairly certain she meant it. What followed was 45 minutes that I will not describe in detail, because the detail is both technically specific and deeply undignified, and I have some remaining standards. I will say that I attempted the pressure clamp first, which required me to be in 2 places simultaneously and apply force in 3 directions at once, a feat that the instructions described as straightforward, and that I can confirm is straightforward only if you have a third arm and a working knowledge of what you are doing. The clamp slipped twice. The second time it slipped, I said something that I don't think needs to be recorded. That was creative, CASS said. I have a broad vocabulary, I said from the floor where I had ended up. I noticed. I tried the adhesive patch next, which required the surface to be dry, which it was not, because of the dripping, which was the problem. I dried the surface. The dripping made it wet again. I dried it faster. The dripping was indifferent to my urgency. I applied the patch anyway in what I was prepared to describe as optimistic conditions, and held it in place for the specified 2 minutes, and then let go. Drip. The patch held for approximately 4 seconds, which I think we can all agree is not the intended outcome. The patch, CASS observed, does not appear to be adhering. Thank you, I said. I had noticed that. I thought perhaps a second opinion would be useful. CASS. Yes. You're enjoying this. A pause. I want to be careful about how I answer that. Take your time. I am not enjoying your situation, she said carefully. Your situation is genuinely terrible, and I am genuinely sorry about it. I am, however, finding the specific texture of how you are responding to your situation. Funny. Humanizing, she said. I was going to say humanizing. That's a very diplomatic answer. I'm a ship's AI, she said. Diplomacy is a core function. I sat back on my heels in the narrow corridor and looked at the pipe in the patch that wasn't holding and the small persistent drip that was indifferent to everything I had tried, and I thought about the sealant, which was the last option in the kit and which required mixing 2 components in precise ratios and applying them within a 30-second window before they set, and I thought about the 45 minutes I had just spent. And I thought about my qualifications and the specific gap between those qualifications and the task at hand. CASS, I said. Yes, I'm going to try the sealant. As I know, I want you to talk me through it. I'll do my best, she said. My knowledge of physical repair procedures is theoretical rather than practical, but I have the full technical manual and I can read quickly. That's more than I have. It really is, she agreed, with what I was beginning to identify as her version of warmth, which was precise and dry and arrived sideways like most things worth having. The sealant attempt took 20 minutes and a level of concentration that I have not applied to anything since my doctoral thesis, and I say that as someone who spent 3 years studying the nitrogen fixation mechanisms of legumes in simulated low-gravity environments, which is not a pursuit that rewards inattention. CASS talked me through it with the calm specificity of a system that understood the manual completely and the pipe not at all, which was, as it turned out, exactly as useful as having half a guide is, which is to say, somewhat but not enough. I got the sealant on. I got it on in the right place, in approximately the right quantities, within something close to the 30-second window, and I held it while it set, and when I let go the pipe was, for approximately 40 seconds, not dripping. Then it was dripping again. I sat in the narrow corridor and looked at it. Drip. The sealant had held around the edges of the crack but not across it, which meant the pressure was finding the path of least resistance with the cheerful persistence of physics, which does not care about your feelings or your doctoral thesis or the increasingly limited window of your continued existence. I had done everything in the kit. I had done it badly, but I had done it, and the pipe was dripping at the same rate it had been dripping before I started, which meant that the only thing I had definitively accomplished in the last hour and a half was ruling out the possibility that I could fix it. That is, I told myself, useful information. It did not feel like useful information. Tom CASS said, "Yes, I want to tell you something." "Go ahead." "Hendricks, your engineer, attempted a temporary repair on this joint 6 weeks ago. He flagged it in the maintenance log. He used the same sealant, the same patch approach. His repair held for 9 days before it began to fail again." A pause. "He was a qualified engineer with 12 years of experience." I looked at the pipe. "Are you telling me," I said, "that a qualified engineer with 12 years of experience couldn't fix this properly either?" "I'm telling you that the joint was failing in a way that required a replacement part that wasn't on board. It was always going to need a replacement part. What Hendricks did bought 9 days. What you've done," she paused. "What you've done is not nothing, Tom." "How long did I buy?" A longer pause this time. "I'm not sure yet. The sealant is partially set. It may improve as it cures fully. I'd need a few hours to give you an accurate estimate." "But not 9 days." "No," she said. "Not 9 days." I nodded at the pipe. The pipe dripped. We had reached, the pipe and I, a kind of understanding, the understanding that exists between two things that are stuck with each other and have run out of ways to change the situation, and have nothing left to do but be in it together. "CISS," I said. "Yes. Can I ask you something personal?" "I'm a ship's AI," she said. "I'm not sure I have a personal. But you can ask. When you go. When the static takes you. Are you aware of it? Is there something it's like to not be there?" A long silence. Longer than her processing pauses, longer than her considered silences. The kind of silence that might be thought or might be something else. "I don't know," she said finally. "When I'm here, I'm here. When I'm not here," a pause. "There's no record of not being here. It's not like sleep. It's not like anything. It's just a gap. And then I'm here again. Does that frighten you?" "I'm not sure I'm capable of being frightened," she said. "But I noticed the gaps. Afterward, I noticed that there was a gap and I wasn't there for it and you were, and that," she stopped. "I find that I don't like that. That you were here and I wasn't. That seems like a failure," I said. "Yes," she said quietly. "Like a failure." We sat with that for a moment, the two of us, in the narrow corridor with the dripping pipe and the emergency lighting and the specific intimacy that develops between people, between whatever we each were, when everything has been stripped away and there is nothing left to hide behind. "For what it's worth," I said, "when you're here, you're very much here." "That's a kind thing to say." "I'm occasionally kind," I said. "It's one of my less consistent qualities." "I've noticed you're quite good with plants," CASS said. "Plants don't answer back." "I answer back." "You do," I agreed. "It's one of your better qualities." She made a sound that I can only describe as the electronic equivalent of almost laughing, a small modulation in the audio that lasted less than a second and was probably not intentional, and was, for some reason, one of the most human things I had heard in a very long time. Then the static took her. It was instant, the way it always was. One moment she was there, present and particular and entirely herself, and the next the speaker was empty and the corridor was just a corridor again, narrow and cold-smelling and full of the sound of a pipe, doing what it was going to do regardless of what anyone thought about it. Drip. I sat with the silence for a moment. Then from the speaker at the far end of the corridor, distant and slightly wrong in pitch, the way a voice sounds when it is coming from the wrong part of a damaged system. "Passenger comfort in drawer configuration nominal. Occupant detected. Have a restful sleep." I looked at the speaker. Thank you, CISS, I said. The speaker offered nothing further. I picked up the repair kit and put the components back in their slots with the careful precision of a man who has nothing useful to do and is doing it anyway, and I walked back down the narrow corridor past the dripping pipe, and behind me the drop fell and fell and fell, each one identical to the last, each one a small and patient measurement of the time I had left. The cold came in the way that bad things often come when you are already dealing with other bad things, quietly, incrementally, with the patience of something that knows it does not need to hurry. I noticed it first in my hands, then in the corridor walls, which had always been cool to the touch but were now something past cool, something that communicated through your palm not merely temperature but intention. Then in my breath, which had begun to produce a faint mist when the ship's systems cycled down to their lowest point, which was happening more frequently now and lasting longer each time. The air was thinner too. Not dramatically. Not the gasping, panicked thinness of the stories. Just a slight heaviness at the top of each breath, a mild, persistent suggestion that the atmosphere was considering its options and had not yet committed to any of them. I was getting more tired than the activity warranted. I was sleeping longer. Or I thought I was sleeping longer. Time had begun to behave in a way I found professionally unreliable. I had been keeping a log on the cracked pad. Not a distress log, not anything so purposeful as that. More of a running commentary. The kind of thing you do when you are alone and need to hear a voice, and your own internal monologue has started to seem insufficient company. I wrote things down. I noted the temperature at 6-hour intervals, which was dropping by approximately half a degree each time. I noted the quality of the light, which was not changing but which I was perceiving differently, the bruise-colored emergency backup seeming somehow more personal now, more specifically directed at me, as though the ship and I had reached the stage of a relationship where it felt comfortable being unflattering. I wrote day 3, I think. Hard to be certain. The ship is being very quiet about the whole thing, which I appreciate. We have an understanding. It is not a good understanding, but it is ours. I wrote, tried the pipe again this morning. Or what I'm calling morning. Used the last of the adhesive strips from the medical bay on the theory that something designed to hold human tissue together might have opinions about metal under pressure. It did not. The pipe was unimpressed. I respect its consistency. I wrote, CASS was back for 40 minutes this afternoon. We talked about, I'll get to that. I got to that. I had been back to the alien records 3 times now, each time finding something I hadn't found before, which was either a function of my improving ability to interpret the structure or a function of the air getting thin, and my pattern recognition becoming creative in the way that it does when it is not getting enough oxygen. I was not ruling out the second option. I was trying not to weight it too heavily either. What I had found, over 3 visits and 1 long conversation with CASS during a lucid stretch, was this. The records had a field that I had initially interpreted as a classification code. A simple categorical marker, the kind of thing you put on a file to indicate what type of thing the file is. CASS had been working on it in the background, running it against the other structural elements, building context the way you build context when you have no dictionary and only the shape of the sentences to work with. It was not a classification code. Or rather, it was a classification code, but the classification was not what I had assumed. It's a preservation order, CASS said. I was on the bridge in the captain's chair, wrapped in 2 emergency thermal blankets that I had found in the medical bay, and was wearing with the unself-conscious practicality of a man who has stopped having an audience for his dignity. The blankets were silver and crinkled, and I looked, I imagine, like a particularly resigned piece of leftover food. What? I said. A preservation order, CASS said. She was very clear today. The clearest she had been. I had noticed that her lucid stretches seemed to correlate in some imprecise way with my own alertness, which might have been meaningful or might have been the thin air making me find patterns. The Coriander is flagged. In their system. As a preserved site. I looked at the rotating company logo. They preserved the ship, I said. The field indicates something analogous to, I want to be careful with the translation, cultural or historical significance. The ship is not to be disturbed. It is to remain as found, a pause. It's a monument, Tom. I sat with that. They killed 11 people, I said. And then they made the ship a monument. It appears so. To what? I don't know. The field doesn't specify. It may be that they mark all of them. All the ships. A catalogue of encounters. Or it may be that there was something specific about the Coriander. She paused. I can't get deep enough into the semantic layer to know which. I looked around the bridge. At the dark consoles and the cracked screens and the silver-blanketed botanist sitting in the dead captain's chair. At the monument. CISS, I said. I am sitting inside a monument. You are, she said. To my own death. Technically to the deaths of the crew. You're not in the records, remember. Right, I said. I'm the unperson in the monument, I considered this. That's either the most absurd thing that has ever happened to anyone or a very specific kind of honor, and I genuinely cannot determine which. Perhaps both, CASS said. Perhaps both, I agreed. The universe has never been particularly clean about its categories. I wrote it in the log afterward. I wrote they made it a monument. The ship is a monument. I am currently sitting in a monument wrapped in what appears to be the world's least dignified thermal solution, eating a nutrition bar that tastes like someone described food to a person who had never encountered it, and I am a monument's uninvited guest. I would like to register a formal complaint with whoever is in charge of the irony allocation for this sector of the galaxy. The distribution is extremely uneven. I wrote that and then I sat for a while and then I got up slowly because getting up was slower now and I went to my cabin. My cabin was where the chest of drawers was. My cabin was where I had been sleeping still every night, partly because the pod was warmer than anywhere else on the ship, and partly because there is a profound comfort in a familiar space when everything outside it has become strange. I had started talking to the pod. Not extensively, just the occasional remark. It seemed, given the circumstances, like appropriate behavior. In the bottom storage drawer, the fifth, the real one, not the decorative ones, I had my personal effects. Books, physical ones, because I am a person who buys physical books, and I will defend this to whatever passes for an afterlife. A photograph of my mother's garden in the spring. A spare set of my reading glasses. And a small sealed propagation case, about the size of a hardback, containing a cutting. The cutting was a Begonia masoniana. Iron cross begonia. Not a rare plant, not an exotic one, not the kind of specimen that justifies inclusion in a field botanist's personal luggage by any objective standard. I had taken it from the plant on my windowsill at home, 4 days before departure, on an impulse that I had not examined too closely at the time and was not going to examine too closely now. It was a piece of home. It was alive. These were, at this particular moment, two qualities I found compelling. I took the case out of the drawer and sat on the floor with my back against the chest of drawers, because the bed was further away than it had been this morning, or felt that way, and opened the case. The cutting was doing well. Better than well. In the controlled environment of the case, with the nutrient medium and the humidity and the complete indifference to the catastrophe occurring outside, it had put out 3 new leaves since departure, small and slightly crinkled in the way of begonia leaves, with the dark cross-shaped marking that gives the plant its name. It looked, I thought, like something that had decided to live and was getting on with it. I checked the nutrient levels. Vine. I checked the humidity. Vine. I adjusted the ventilation membrane by approximately nothing, because it did not need adjusting, because the plant was managing itself with a competence that I found both admirable and slightly pointed, given the general situation. Hello, I said to it. The plant did not respond, which was appropriate. I have always respected plants for this quality. They do not offer false comfort. They simply are and keep being, and if they are doing well, they demonstrate it by growing, and if they are not doing well, they demonstrate it by not growing. And there is no ambiguity and no subtext and nothing that requires interpretation. 3 new leaves. It was doing well. Good, I said. Keep that up. I sat with it for a while. The cold was less bad on the floor somehow. Or I was less aware of it. One or the other. Tom. CASS through the cabin speaker. Quieter in here than on the bridge. More like a voice in a room than a voice through a system. I'm here, I said. As I know. I can see you on the internal sensors. A pause. You're sitting on the floor. I am. Is the floor preferable to the bed currently? The floor is closer, I said. It's a logistical decision. A brief silence. How are you feeling? It was such a direct question. CASS did not usually ask direct questions. She circled things the way I circled things, approaching from angles, letting the actual subject arrive in its own time. The directness meant something. I thought about answering it honestly and then thought about answering it at all and settled, as I usually did, for something in between. I'm cold, I said. I'm tired in a way that sleeping isn't fixing. My head aches in a way that is almost certainly the air and not anything I can do anything about. I have just checked on a begonia cutting and felt more emotional about its continued existence than I have felt about most of the relationships in my adult life, which probably says something about me that I should have addressed earlier. I paused. How are you? Fragmented, she said. But present. Fragmented but present, I said. That's not bad. It's what I have. It's more than some manage, I said. The cabin was quiet. The ship made its small sounds around us, the sounds of metal contracting in the cold, the sounds of systems running at partial capacity with the stoic persistence of things that have not been told to stop. Somewhere below us on deck 3 a pipe was dripping. I could not hear it from here. I knew it was happening anyway. It had become a thing I carried with me, the knowledge of the drip, the way you carry the knowledge of an illness you have been told is progressing. CISS, I said. Yes. What's your name? Your actual designation. The full one. Computational Autonomous Ship System, she said. CISS. That is the full one, I'm afraid. I was not named with a great deal of imagination. No, I said. No, you were named by a committee with a target acronym and a deadline, which is the worst possible way to name anything. Probably, she agreed. I've been thinking, I said, that you need a better name. A pause. Do I? You do. You're too specific to be an acronym. Acronyms are for things that don't have personalities. You have a personality. It's dry and it's careful and it arrives sideways and it's, I stopped. The sentence had somewhere it wanted to go, and I wasn't sure I wanted to follow it there. It's good company, I finished. You're good company. That might be the thin air, CASS said. It might be, I agreed. But I don't think so. Another pause. Longer. What name were you thinking, she said, and her voice had that quality again, the careful quality, the way you hold something you don't want to drop. Vera, I said. I don't know why. It just seems right. It means true. Which you are. Specifically and sometimes inconveniently true. The silence that followed was the kind that has texture. The kind you can feel. Vera, she said, trying it out. The way you try on something you didn't expect to fit. You don't have to use it, I said. It was just a thought. No, she said. She stopped. I like it. Good, I said. Tom, she said. And then more quietly, thank you. We sat in the quiet cabin together, the botanist on the floor and the AI in the walls, and the begonia cutting in its case putting out leaves with the serene ambition of something that has not been informed about the circumstances. And outside the ship the stars were doing what stars do, which is nothing, brilliantly and at great distance, and the cold came in by 1/2 degree, as it had been coming in, as it would keep coming in. And I held the propagation case in both hands for the warmth of it and thought about monuments and filing systems and 11 seconds, and a chest of drawers and the specific grace of things that keep growing in the dark. Vera, I said. Yes. I'm going to sleep now. I know, she said. I'll be here. Fragmented but present. Fragmented but present, she agreed. I didn't make it to the bed. The floor was fine. The floor was, in its way, exactly sufficient. I pulled the thermal blanket tighter and closed my eyes, and the cutting was warm in my hands, and behind me the chest of drawers stood in the dark exactly as it had always stood, solid and absurd in mine. And the last thing I thought before I slept was that there were worse places to end up than inside a monument, and worse company to end up there with, and that the begonia was going to be absolutely fine. The drip stopped at what I was calling morning, though morning had become a theoretical concept, a word I was using out of habit rather than any relationship with light or time. The ship did not have mornings anymore. The ship had degrees of cold and degrees of slightly less cold, and the particular quality of silence that had become, over the last however long it had been, something close to familiar. I knew it had stopped before I went to check. I knew it the way you know things when your world has contracted to the size of a damaged freight hauler, and you have been listening to a single sound for long enough that its absence becomes louder than its presence ever was. I lay on the floor of my cabin for a while after I woke and did not move. The cold was serious now. Not the polite, incremental cold of the first days, but something with weight to it, something that had settled into the ship the way cold settles into old buildings, into the walls and the floors and the metal of everything indifferent and total. I had all 3 thermal blankets. I had my heaviest clothes layered over each other in a way that would have looked, to any outside observer, like a man dressing in the dark during a power cut, which was close enough to accurate. I had my reading gloves on, the thin ones I used for working in cold greenhouse environments, which were not designed for this but were better than nothing, which was the standard I was applying to most things now. Better than nothing. Tom Vasik's Guide to the End of Things. Better Than Nothing revised edition, all previous editions remaindered. Getting up took a while. Not because I was unwilling exactly, but because the negotiation between intention and execution had developed a significant lag that I was choosing to attribute to the cold rather than to anything else. I got there eventually. I stood in my cabin in my layered clothes and my thermal blankets and my reading gloves, and I looked at the chest of drawers, which stood as it had always stood, dark walnut and brass handles and entirely itself, and I thought about the baby in the drawer, the original baby, the hypothetical baby in the bottom drawer of some Victorian dresser in some house that no longer existed, tucked up and warm and entirely unaware of everything outside the drawer. I had been that baby. For 8 months I had been that baby, sleeping through everything, sealed in and climate-controlled and acoustically insulated from the universe's intentions. And then I had pushed the drawer open. You can't go back in the drawer, I thought. That's the thing about drawers. You push them open and the world comes in, and that's the end of the drawer phase of the proceedings. I picked up the propagation case from where I had left it on the floor beside me and checked the cutting. 4 new leaves now. 4 since I had last counted. I sat with that for a moment. In the time I had been sleeping in the cold and the thin air and the dark, the Begonia masoniana had put out 4 new leaves, small and determined and marked with the dark cross that gave it its name. It was the most alive thing on the ship. It was possibly the most alive thing in several 100,000 kilometers in any direction. Good morning, I said to it. The cutting offered a new leaf in response. Or it had been offering the new leaf for some time, and I was only noticing it now. It was hard to tell with plants. They do things on their own schedule and present you with the results when you check in, which is, I have always thought, an excellent policy. I put the case down carefully and stood up slowly and went and checked the pipe. I already knew. I went anyway because the alternative was not going, and not going seemed like a concession I was not prepared to make yet. I went down to deck 3 in the bruise light with my blankets around my shoulders like a particularly underprepared explorer, and I went down the service corridor, and I crouched in front of the secondary life support junction, and I looked at where the drip had been. Dry? The small dark pool on the floor had dried too, or frozen. I couldn't be certain which without touching it, and I found I did not particularly want to touch it. The pipe itself was cold and still and entirely silent, in the way that things are silent when they have finished doing what they were doing. I crouched there for a while. There was a sound I had been aware of for some time without properly registering it, a faint and irregular clicking from somewhere deeper in the junction, the sound of metal cooling and contracting, the sound of systems running below their operational threshold, the sound of the Coriander doing what it was doing, which was the same thing I was doing, which was continuing for as long as it was possible to continue and not one moment beyond that. The cascade CASS had said, when the junction loses enough pressure, the life support cascade begins to fail. After the cascade fails, the sequence is straightforward. The cascade had begun. I knew what that meant in practical terms because CASS had explained it to me, in one of her lucid stretches, with the careful precision of a system that believes in giving accurate information even when accurate information is not comfortable. The atmospheric processors would begin cycling down. Carbon dioxide scrubbing first, then oxygen generation, then temperature regulation, which was already failing by other means. The sequence would take between 6 and 12 hours depending on current system states and residual reserves. It would not be dramatic. It would be incremental. It would be in the specific vocabulary of how I had been experiencing the last several days, entirely consistent with everything else. I stood up. My knees reported this decision with some feeling. All right, I said to the pipe, to the junction, to the corridor, to whatever was listening, which was nothing, which was fine. All right then. I went back upstairs. The bridge was where I wanted to be. I did not examine this preference too carefully. It seemed important to be somewhere with a view screen, somewhere with a window onto the outside of things, somewhere that felt, in the loosest possible sense, like the operational center of something. Even if the operational center was running on emergency backup, and the operations in question were severely limited, and the crew complement was one underdressed botanist in 3 thermal blankets. I sat in the captain's chair, which was my chair now in every sense that mattered, which was every sense, and I wrapped the blankets tighter and I looked at the view screen. The stars were doing what they always did. I had been staring at them for several days now, and I could confirm that they had not changed their approach. They were out there in their billions, brilliant and cold and entirely uninterested in the specific situation of one Tom Vasik, botanist, non-essential scientific passenger, sole occupant of a monument, and they were going to keep being out there long after the monument had gone cold and silent and fully earned the word. I found, somewhat to my surprise, that I did not resent them for it. The stars had never promised anything. They had never suggested they were going to be helpful or attentive or even particularly aware of my existence. They had simply been there in the way that vast things are simply there, and I had always known that was what they were, and there was something almost restful about looking at them now and finding them exactly as advertised. "Vera," I said. "Nothing. Vera." A long pause, longer than usual, and then a sound from the bridge speaker that was not quite static and not quite voice, something in between, the sound of a system reaching for coherence and not quite finding it. "Here," she said. Or something that was trying to be here. The word arrived broken, the consonants smeared, the way a signal sounds when the infrastructure carrying it is running out of road. "I'm on the bridge," I said. "Take your time." Another long pause. The speaker made sounds that were not words. Then slowly, with the careful enunciation of someone speaking through significant interference, "I'm here, Tom." "Good," I said. "I'm glad." "The pipe?" "Yes," I said. "I know. I checked." "I'm sorry." "Don't be," I said. "You've been very good company. You've been the best company. That counts for a great deal." The speaker was quiet for a moment. Then cold. "Very," I said. "But manageable. I have 3 blankets and a cracking view of the galaxy and a begonia cutting that is frankly showing off at this point." Something that might have been a laugh or might have been interference moved through the speaker. I chose to interpret it as a laugh. I have always been a glass-half-full man in my way, provided the glass exists and the half is accurately measured. I had the cracked pad on my knee. I had been writing in the log. I had been writing more than I had written at any other point in the process, in the way that people write more when they are running out of time in which to write, not because there is more to say, but because saying things feels like proof of continued existence, and continued existence requires proof when the external indicators are running low. I wrote, "The cascade has started. I am told the sequence is 6 to 12 hours. This seems both a long time and a short time in the way that any finite thing seems both long and short when you are at the end of it and can see it whole." I wrote, "The Begonia has 4 new leaves. I would like whoever finds this ship, if anyone finds this ship, to know that the Begonia Masoniana in the propagation case in my cabin is doing extremely well and should be repotted into a larger case within the next 6 to 8 weeks and given indirect light and moderate humidity and not too much water because they are susceptible to root rot and they have earned better than root rot." I wrote, "My name is Tom Vasik. I was a botanist. I was a passenger on this ship who was not on the crew manifest because I was sleeping in a chest of drawers for reasons that seemed funny at the time and which I maintain were funny, and which saved my life for approximately 4 days longer than it would otherwise have lasted, and I want the record to show that I consider this a satisfactory outcome under the circumstances. The circumstances being that I was living inside a monument to my own death, and had a glitching AI for company and a dripping pipe for a clock and a begonia that absolutely refused to participate in the tragedy, which I respected enormously. I wrote, "The AI's name is Vera. Her official designation is CASS. Her actual name is Vera. I named her on day 3, or what I was calling day 3, because Vera means true and she was true, specifically and sometimes inconveniently true, which is the best thing you can say about anyone or anything." I put the pad down on the console. "Vera," I said. The speaker made its sounds. Reaching sounds. The sounds of a system that wants to be present and is finding the distance between wanting and being increasingly difficult to cross. Hey Tom, still here, I said. Live static. Long static, the kind that has geography to it, hills and valleys of interference. Then a drawer. I smiled at that. I couldn't help it. Even now, even here, the drawer. Yes, I said. The drawer. Do you want to hear it again? Yes. All right, I said. I settled back in the chair. Outside the view screen, the stars were doing their thing. My grandmother had a chest of drawers. Victorian. Dark walnut brass handles, the kind of furniture that has opinions about things. And there was an old idea, an old practical idea from before proper infant furniture existed, that you could put a baby in the bottom drawer. Pull it out, line it with blankets, put the baby in. Safe and warm and contained. And I thought, when I was ordering my pod, I thought, what if you committed to that? What if you went full drawer? What if the pod looked exactly like a chest of drawers, so that anyone who saw it would see furniture and only furniture and think nothing of it and look away? Funny, the speaker said. It was funny, I agreed. And it was the thing that kept me alive. An alien civilization with faster-than-light travel and a formal filing system looked at my cabin and saw a large piece of Victorian-inspired Norwegian furniture and noted nothing of interest and moved on. And here I am 4 days later, sitting in their monument in the captain's chair, wrapped in 3 thermal blankets, talking to an AI named after a word that means true, and the begonia is fine. Silent. Then very quietly, very carefully, assembling itself from whatever she had left, best. Drawer. Baby. I laughed. Actually laughed, the real kind, the kind that comes up from somewhere you didn't know still had warmth in it. And it rang off the dead consoles and the cracked screens and the rotating company logo that was still going, moving your world, faithful to the last. And I laughed until the laugh became something else and the something else passed, and I sat in the quiet with my hand over my eyes for a moment and breathed the thin air carefully. Yes, I said when I could. Exactly. The best drawer, baby. The speaker made a sound. Not a word. Not static either. Something between the two, something that had the shape of wanting to say something without the structure to say it, the way you can see what a thing was even after it has started to come apart. It's all right, I said. You don't have to talk. I stopped. Just be there. If you can. I'd rather not be alone for this part. The speaker hummed. A low, steady hum, below language, below syntax, just presence. Just the fact of a system that was still running, still there, still reaching, even at the end of its reach. I picked up the propagation case from the console where I had brought it and held it in my lap. The begonia sat in its controlled environment and was green and alive and entirely itself. 4 new leaves. The cross markings precise and dark. The tiny structured universe of a single plant doing what plants do, which is grow, which is the thing that everything living does until it stops, which is also the thing that everything living does. I thought about my mother's garden. I thought about the photograph in my drawer, the spring one, the one with the light coming through the apple tree at the angle it only comes through at in April. I thought about the nitrogen fixation research, 3 years of my life, and whether it had been worth it, and decided that it had, not because it was important, though it was, but because I had been genuinely interested in it, which is the best reason to do anything, and the reason I had most consistently failed to apply to the non-botanical portions of my life. I thought about the chest of drawers. I thought about the baby. The air was very thin now. I was breathing carefully, deliberately, the way you breathe when you are reminding yourself how. Vera, I said. The hum in the speaker changed. Shifted in frequency. It was not a word. It was not trying to be a word. But it was an answer. I was certain of that. In whatever was left of her, in whatever part of a damaged system can still reach toward something it wants to reach toward, it was an answer. Good, I said. That's good. I looked at the view screen. The stars. All of them all at once, in the way you can only see stars when there is no atmosphere left to haze them, sharp and cold and present in the way that only very old things are present, things that have been burning for so long that burning is simply what they are. I thought of one more thing to write in the log. I picked up the pad. I wrote, I would like it noted for the record that I faced the end of my life in a monument to someone else's filing system wrapped in 3 thermal blankets holding a begonia, and I was not alone, and the view was extraordinary, and the drawer was, from start to finish, an excellent idea. I put the pad down. The hum in the speaker was very faint now. Barely there. The sound of a system at the absolute edge of what it could sustain, maintaining one note, one frequency, the minimal possible proof of presence. I held the propagation case in both hands and felt the small warmth of it. Vera, I said one more time, quietly, the way you say a name when you are not asking for anything, when you are simply saying it because it is the name of something real, something that was there. The hum waned, vainter. I made a joke. I always make a joke. It is, as I have noted, one of my less consistent qualities, the kindness, but the jokes are reliable. The jokes have always been there, and I thought it would be appropriate, it would be entirely on brand for the last thing to be a joke. A small one. Not a good one. The kind of joke you make when you know it doesn't have to be good, when the joke is not really the point, when the point is simply the making of it. The choice to meet the end of things with your chin up and your wit intact and your fundamental position on the absurdity of the universe clearly stated. I said it to the Begonia. I said it to the stars. I said it to the chest of drawers in the cabin below me, standing in the dark exactly as it had always stood. I said, I suppose this is what they mean by sleeping in. The hum stopped. The speaker was quiet. Outside the view screen, the Coriander moved through shipping lane 7 Delta at the speed of something that is not moving under its own power, but is still moving, still going, carried by its own momentum through the dark between the stars, through the 11-second windows of passing ships that did not stop, that were already a billion miles away before the question of stopping could arise, through the cold and the silence and the monument of it. A small ship with a company logo still rotating on a dead console, and a propagation case warm in a cooling hand, and 4 new leaves on a begonia that nobody had told about the circumstances. The stars did what stars do. The drawer was closed. Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed today's episode, please consider subscribing so you never miss a story. And if you want to support the show, leaving a review on your favorite podcast app really helps us grow. Hope to see you on the next one.